My name is Martha Benson, and I'm 73 years old. There are some memories you never forget, some that live in the corners of your mind, no matter how many years pass. This is one of those stories. I grew up in Oregon Hill, the kind of small American town where everyone knew when you baked a pie or painted your porch. My father worked long hours at the lumber mill, and my mother taught Sunday school. We weren't wealthy, but life was steady. I thought happiness was something you could build if you followed the rules. Then, in the summer of 1956, I met Bill Benson at the town's Independence Day picnic. I was just 18, wearing a blue dress my mother had sewn from leftover fabric. Bill had just returned from Korea, tall, sun-browned, with the kind of smile that could make a shy girl blush. When he asked me to dance beneath the bunting and fireworks, it felt like the world stopped spinning. You're the prettiest girl here, he whispered. I believed him. Bill was polite, charming, the kind of man who brought wildflowers and always said yes, ma'am, to my mother. Daddy approved right away. That boy's got a good head on his shoulders, he said. 6 months later, we were married in a white church on Main Street. I wore my mama's wedding dress and carried daisies instead of roses because we couldn't afford the fancy kind. Our early years were the kind you see in old photographs: smiling faces, white fences, the glow of promise. Bill found steady work at a car parts factory, and we bought a tiny home with a porch swing. Every evening we'd sit there talking about the future: 3 kids, maybe 4, a garden, a dog. I thought I was the luckiest woman in the world. When our first baby, Jimmy, arrived in the spring of 1959, Bill cried, holding him. He passed out cigars at the hospital, calling me his angel. That night he went out to celebrate with his coworkers. When he came home past midnight, his steps were heavy and his breath smelled like beer. Jimmy was crying. I'd been rocking him for hours. Can't you shut that kid up? Bill snapped. It startled me. He'd never raised his voice before. He's just hungry again, I said softly. Babies cry. Well, make him stop, he grumbled, collapsing onto the bed. By morning, he was apologetic, bringing me flowers as if nothing had happened. 2 days later, it happened again, but worse. Dinner was late. Jimmy had been fussy all afternoon. Bill's plate clattered as he pushed it away. I work all day for this. I'm sorry, I said, exhausted. I'll fix you something else. Before I could move, his hand slammed the table, rattling the dishes. When Jimmy began crying, I turned to pick him up. Bill grabbed my arm. Leave him, he said coldly. He's just a baby. The slap came fast, sharp, echoing in the tiny kitchen. My lips split. For a second Bill looked as shocked as I was. Now look what you made me do, he muttered, sitting back down. I stood frozen, one hand on my cheek, tears stinging my eyes. Jimmy wailing in the background. That night, Bill brought me an ice pack and whispered that it would never happen again. He blamed the factory stress, the layoffs, the buyer. I wanted to believe him, but because believing him was easier than facing the truth. And so, the first bruise faded, but something inside me didn't. I told myself it was just a bad night, that love could fix anything, but I didn't know then that slap was only the beginning of 3 decades of silence, scars, and secrets. For a few weeks after that night, Bill was the husband I'd first fallen in love with. He kissed my forehead before work, brought home wildflowers, and rocked Jimmy to sleep like a proud father. I told myself everything was fine, just a small crack in a good marriage. When our daughter Carol was born 2 years later, I thought maybe life had truly settled. Bill was overjoyed, called her his little princess. We took family pictures in the park, smiling for the camera, pretending everything was perfect. But behind those smiles, the tension had already crept back in. It started small. A harsh word if dinner was late. A cold glare when the house wasn't spotless. Then came the tight grip on my arm. The shove into a wall because I'd bought the wrong detergent. I said the blue box, Martha, not the red one. He'd growl. And I'd whisper, I'm sorry, because those words often stopped things from getting worse. By the time our youngest, Tommy, came along in 1964, the pattern was clear. Bill would be loving and gentle for weeks, then snap without warning. He'd bring me roses after every outburst, bright red, the same color as my bruises. I learned to hide them under long sleeves and careful smiles. One summer Sunday, I wore sunglasses to church to cover a black eye. After service, Pastor Daniels pulled me aside. "Martha, is everything all right at home?" he asked kindly. My heart raced. Someone had noticed. Maybe, finally, someone would help. "Just clumsy, Pastor," I said, forcing a smile. He nodded solemnly. "Marriage takes patience, my dear. Pray for strength. And remember, wives are to submit to their husbands." That's when I realized the church wasn't going to save me. When Bill broke my wrist a year later, I told the doctor I'd fallen down the stairs. Dr. Hopkins frowned, his eyes lingering too long on the bruises. "You've had a lot of accidents lately," he said quietly. I nodded, tears burning my eyes. "I'm just not careful enough." He hesitated, then sighed. "Be more careful, Mrs. Benson." That's when I learned doctors wouldn't save me either. I thought about confiding in my sister, Janet, over the phone. "He hit me again," I whispered one afternoon while Bill was at work. There was a long pause. "You must have done something to make him mad," she finally said. "Bill's such a nice man at family gatherings." "He hit me because I burned the roast, Janet." "Well," she replied softly, "men have tempers. You just need to keep peace in the home." That's when I realized family wouldn't help me either. The years passed, slow and heavy. The children grew up walking on eggshells, learning which floorboards creaked and which words might set their father off. Jimmy tried to stand up for me once when he was 14. Bill knocked him across the room. We told the hospital he fell off his bike. "Accidents happen," Bill told the nurse with that same easy smile that fooled everyone. I thought about running 100 times, but where would I go? I had no money of my own. Bill controlled every penny, every decision. And he made sure I knew the consequences. "If I ever left your mind, Martha," he'd whisper, his breath hot against my neck, "till death do us part." I believed him. For 30 years, I lived like that behind drawn curtains and forced laughter. And then one night, something inside me broke for good. It wasn't when he hit me. It was when he took something that wasn't his to take something my father had left me. That night I stopped being afraid. When Bill stole my inheritance and beat me for hesitating, I realized he hadn't just taken my money, he'd taken my freedom. And I swore that night I'd find a way to take it back. The night Bill stole the money my father left me, I stopped pretending things would ever get better. Daddy had left me a small inheritance. Nothing grand. Just a few $1,000s and a note that said, "Use this for yourself, sweetheart. You've earned it." When I told Bill I wanted to keep it separate, just in my own name, he smiled that cold smile I'd come to dread. "Don't you trust me, Martha?" he said. Before I could answer, he grabbed the check from my hand. The beating that followed left me with 2 broken ribs and 1 swollen eye. The next day, I signed the money over to him. A week later, he gambled it all away at the track that night. Lying in bed, aching from head to toe, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just anger, it was clarity. Bill had taken everything from my dignity, my hope, my safety. But what he didn't know was that deep inside me, there was still a spark. And it came from a woman named Granny May, my grandmother's aunt. She lived at the edge of town when I was a child, in a little house surrounded by wild herbs and flowers. People whispered that she was strange, but they still came to her door when they were desperate, when the doctor's medicine didn't work, when fevers ran too high. "Plants have power, Martha," she'd told me once, kneeling beside her garden. "God put the cure for every pain in something that grows." Her hands were gnarled and brown from years in the soil. Some herbs healed, she'd said, some soothed the mind, and a few protected women when nobody else would. I never understood what she meant until that night, lying there with Bill snoring beside me. Her words came back as if whispered in my ear. I could almost smell her mint and lavender. I remembered the little jar she'd shown me when I was 12, a soft brown powder made from roots and leaves. Not to harm, she'd said, but to stop harm long enough to get away. I hadn't thought about that in decades. But now, every bruise on my body reminded me why she'd shown me. The next morning, after Bill left for work, I went up to the attic and found the old wooden chest my mother had given me years ago. Inside were yellowed letters, photos, and Granny May's worn leather notebook. The pages smelled of time and wild earth. There, Written in her slanted handwriting was the recipe: valerian root, chamomile, skullcap. A measure of sleep, not of death. I closed the book and sat there trembling. Was I really thinking about this? Would God forgive me? But when I touched my bruised ribs, I knew. It wasn't about revenge, it was survival. Over the next few weeks, I began to prepare. I told Bill I was taking a church gardening class on Tuesdays. In truth, I drove to a small herbal store 2 towns over, a dusty little shop run by a woman with long gray braids. Looking for something special, she asked. Just learning natural remedies, I said, keeping my voice light. She sold me dried herbs and powders in brown paper bags, each one labeled neatly. At night, I hid them in empty coffee tins behind Bill's fishing tackle. I borrowed books from the library about old medicine, mixing, and dosage. I read until my eyes ached, memorizing every line. The last ingredient was the hardest to find. I called Aunt Judith, my mother's cousin who lived in the mountains and had learned a few of Granny's ways. When I told her I wanted the recipe for Granny's sleeping blend, there was a long pause. Sleeping problems, or sleeping husband problems? She asked finally. My throat went dry. I don't know what you mean. Then come see me, she said quietly. Bring no one. That Saturday I told Bill Aunt Judith was sick and needed help. He barely looked up from his paper. Be home by supper. 3 hours later, I was in Judith's kitchen, surrounded by jars and dried flowers. She didn't ask about the fading bruise on my face. She just poured me tea and said, Your Granny May helped your grandmother once, and now it's my turn to help you. She handed me a small pouch wrapped in cloth. This will hide the taste. Use sparingly, Martha. Too little, it won't work. Too much. She didn't finish the sentence. I don't want to hurt him, I said quickly. I know, Judith said softly. This isn't about hurting. It's about taking back your life. As I left, she pressed a tiny key into my palm. Safety deposit box $500. Granny started it for women in our family who might need to disappear. Driving home, the key warm in my hand, I realized something incredible. For the first time in 30 years, I wasn't scared. I had a plan. That night, as Bill threw his plate against the wall for overcooked meatloaf, I didn't cry, because for the first time in decades, I wasn't powerless anymore. The night before I left, the house was silent except for Bill's snoring. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every step of the plan. The powder was ready fine as cinnamon and hidden in an old vitamin bottle labeled iron. Double quotes. My small bag was packed and tucked behind the linen towels. My grandmother's recipe book rested inside my Bible, right where he'd never looked at. After 30 years of fear, I was about to reclaim my life. When dawn came, I moved quietly, careful not to wake him. I put on the blue dress he always said he liked, tied my hair neatly, and looked at my reflection. My face had aged, but in my eyes I saw something new: determination. In the kitchen, I set the coffee pot to brew, just as I did every morning. Pancake batter hissed on the skillet, the smell of butter filling the air. If anyone walked in, it would have looked like any other day in our home, but it wasn't. It was the last. Bill shuffled in wearing his robe, rubbing his eyes. Morning, he grunted. Morning, I replied. My voice steady though, my heart thudded in my chest. I placed his first cup of coffee in front of him. Black, 2 sugars. He drank half of it while scanning the paper. When he finished, I brought the second cup. That one was special. The powder dissolved perfectly, no color, no smell, just 2 sugars, the way he liked it. He took a sip without a word. Pancakes are good today, he said, still reading. It was the closest thing to kindness I'd heard in months. Glad you like them, I whispered. 15 minutes later, he blinked slowly. Paper's fuzzy, he muttered. Feels like my head's full of cotton. Maybe you're coming down with something, I said. He yawned, rubbed his temples. I think I'll rest a bit. He made his way to the recliner and sank into it heavily. Within minutes, his breathing deepened. I waited 5 more, watching the clock tick. Then I touched his wrist, steady pulse. Deep sleep, that it had worked. For a long moment I just stood there, staring at him. This man who had once been my dream and had turned into my nightmare now, helpless and harmless. I didn't feel triumph, only relief. I called the factory pretending to be a dutiful wife. Bill won't make it in today, I said. He's sick. Then I packed. My purse held the safety deposit key, my hidden savings, and a small photo of my children. I left his wallet on the dresser, taking only $100 and half the bank balance money I had earned through decades of endurance. Before walking out, I covered him with a blanket, not out of love, but to keep curious eyes from seeing him asleep through the window. Then I took one final look around the house. Every scratch on the wall, every dented plate, every patch of worn carpet held a memory I didn't want. When the door closed behind me, the sound was soft but final. I walked 3 blocks to the bus stop. My legs felt weak, but my chest was light for the first time in years. Neighbors waved, unaware they were witnessing my escape. Off to the store, Martha, Mrs. Peterson called, just running a few errands. I smiled, and in a way I was errands that would save my life. The bus arrived right on time. As it pulled away, I looked out the window at the white fence and porch swing fading into the distance. That house had been my prison for 40 years, but now it was behind me. I cashed the forged check with a steady hand, smiled politely at the bank teller, and accessed our safety deposit box for the first time in my life. Inside were family papers and $5,000 in cash. His secret stash. I took it all. Not out of greed, but justice. Then I bought a ticket to Atlanta, the place where freedom waited. Before the bus left, I made 3 calls. 1 to Jimmy, telling him I'd finally left. 1 to Carol, who didn't understand. And 1 to Tommy, who simply said, "Way to go, Mom." I hung up, exhaled, and looked at the road ahead. Every mile that passed was a lifetime leaving me behind. As the bus rolled toward the horizon, I closed my eyes and whispered, "Don't look back, Martha." But I didn't know then Belle wouldn't let go of me, so I reached Atlanta late that night. The air was heavy with summer heat, the kind that clings to your skin. Waiting at the station was Doris, my friend Helen's sister, a kind-faced woman who hugged me like she'd known me all her life. "You're safe now," she whispered. Her apartment was small but warm, filled with plants and sunlight. I cried that first night, not out of sadness, but from the shock of being free. For the first time in decades, I slept without listening for footsteps or slammed doors. Over the next few weeks, Doris helped me find my footing. She introduced me to a woman who owned a diner. "She's looking for waitresses," Doris said. I started work there, $6 an hour plus tips. It wasn't much, but it was honest. Every plate I carried felt like proof I could stand on my own 2 feet. Then one morning, a familiar shadow appeared outside the diner. Bill. He looked thinner, unshaven, but that same dangerous glint still burned in his eyes. I froze, breath caught in my chest. Mrs. Patel, the diner's owner, stepped forward before I could move. "You need to leave," she told him firmly, hand on the phone. "This is private property," he argued, his voice rising, but she didn't budge. Finally, he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. That night, Doris helped me pack again. "You can't stay here," she said. "He'll come back." By morning, I was gone off to Savannah, under my maiden name, Martha Wilson. I filed for divorce with a kind-hearted lawyer who'd helped other women like me. Bill fought it. Of course, claimed I was unstable, that I'd abandoned my duties, but my lawyer had gathered every piece of evidence I'd hidden over the years. The hospital reports, the bruises, even the testimony of our sons. The judge didn't hesitate. The divorce was final. Half of everything was mine, including the house. I sold my share. That money became my new beginning. Months passed before I heard from Bill again. A letter, shaky handwriting. Double quotes, "Martha, I'm seeing a counselor now. They say I have problems from Korea. I know that's no excuse. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to change. I was a monster to you, and I'm sorry. For a long time, I didn't know how to feel. Anger, pity, maybe both, but I never wrote back." 2 years later, I learned Bill was dying of lung cancer. Our son Jimmy called. "He's asking for you, Mom. Says he wants to apologize in person." I thought about it for days. Then, against every instinct, I went when I saw him again. He was a shell of the man I'd known, pale, thin, a breathing tube in his nose. He looked up and whispered, "You came." "Yes," I said. "I came to say goodbye." He nodded slowly, tears forming. "I remember everything I did to you. I was wrong, Martha. every bit of it. I studied his face and realized I wasn't angry anymore, that I wasn't afraid either. I don't hate you, I told him quietly. I just don't feel anything for you anymore. He nodded again, as if he understood. That's fair, he said softly. He passed away 2 weeks later, on a cold November morning. At the funeral, people whispered that I was brave to come. I didn't feel brave, just free. That after the burial, I sold what little tied me to that town, and moved to Florida. A place where the air smelled like salt and second chances. I found a small apartment near the beach, got a part-time job at a library, and started over. That was 15 years ago. Now I'm 73, living by the sea. The mornings are quiet, the evenings filled with the sound of waves instead of shouting. My children visit often. Jimmy brings his wife and kids. Tommy calls from California, where he helps people heal from trauma. Even Carol, who once couldn't understand me, finally found the courage to leave her own unhappy marriage. Sometimes I sit on my balcony at sunset, sipping tea and watching the horizon turn gold. And I think about that morning long ago, the one when I stirred a little powder into a cup of coffee and walked away from fear. Was it right? I don't know. But it was necessary. That powder didn't kill him, it saved me now. When I meet women who whisper apologies for bruises or excuses for silence, I recognize them. I slip them small lifelines, a pamphlet, a phone number, a quiet word, because I know how it feels to believe there's no way out. If my story helps even one woman choose freedom, then all those years weren't wasted. I'm not proud of what I did, but I'm not sorry either, because peace, my dear, is worth anything. So tell me, if you were in my place, would you have done the same? If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel, because every story I tell might just help someone find their own way out of the dark.